Hello, my name is Christian. This is a presentation for Dr. Yang CIS 388, Information System Analysis and Design. For this presentation, I am focusing on his assignment number 5, Make Object-Oriented Use Case for the Mozart Piano Studio project. So let's get started. Per the assignment, first we must read the attached requirements document of Mozart Piano Studio project and finish a part of the OO analysis. For the assignment, we have to submit the following items: a complete use case diagram, which must cover all the functions and user requirement documents. And number 2, we must add a corresponding use case description to each use case in the use case diagram. The description must cover enough details of business procedure actions, and the description must cover enough details of computer processes. So my plan for this assignment was to develop the understanding and knowledge needed to do the assignment, and then develop the object-oriented use case diagram as per the assignment requirements, which were, create a use case description for create a use case description for each use case. Before I actually started the assignment, seeing as I had never created a object-oriented use case diagram, I estimated that the assignment would actually take me at least a week to complete. A few days of learning what all entail within a OO use case diagram, and a few days to fully incorporate a OO use case diagram, full with objects, messages, which would show how each of the objects relate to each other. To do this, as stated above, I needed to gain knowledge on what an OO use case diagram was, and to be honest, up until this class, I had no idea what OO stood for, let alone any information that went into it. So first I had to figure out what OO stood for. I now know that OO stands for object-oriented. So my next question from there was, how do I go from knowing what object-oriented is to finishing this assignment? The first thing I had to do was to open all relevant information on what object-oriented case diagrams were by looking at textbooks, in this case our textbook, looking at PowerPoints provided by Dr. Yang, and then also the videos that he provided for us to learn what each one of those meant, or each one of those case diagrams were for. So let's take a quick overview of what object-oriented use case diagrams entail. Some of the terms associated with it are unified modeling language, which are the methods of visualizing and documenting an information system. Attributes, which are the characteristics that describe the object. Methods, the task or functions that the object performs. Message, a command to perform a method. Class, a group of similar objects. And instance, a specific member of a class. So these are all the terms that are used in creating an OO use case diagram, or an object-oriented use case diagram. Excuse me. So we have the definition of object-oriented use case diagram. We have the key terms associated with the term, or with them, and so let's go ahead and develop the diagram. But unfortunately, it wasn't that easy. So my next question, once I had all the information, was to how do I create this object-oriented use case diagram? So that question led me to a bunch of other questions, like what does an object-oriented use case diagram look like? How big does it need to be? How detailed does it need to be? How are attributes, methods, messages, classes, and instances arranged? Where does UML fall within the object-oriented use case diagram? So these were all the problems that I encountered. Now in chapter 6 we learned that UML is the way that we visualize our information system. It has its own set of symbols. In this case, UML symbol for a use case is an oval with a label that describes the action or the event. The actor, which is shown as a stick figure with a label that identifies the actor's role. And so here's an example of what that looks like. So you can see here one of the actors is the customer, and then the use case create work orders is an oval shape right here. Now there's a couple other things here in this use case diagram. You notice these arrows. We'll go over that here in a second. We'll come back to that again. We'll come back to that here in a second. But within these oval use cases, looking at this next PowerPoint here, you actually see the objects in these cases. So the use case is the kind of like how the catch-all for the system, and then the objects are the specifics or how the system acts to information received into the system, or the information provided outside of the system. And so these objects communicate via messages, and so that's what these arrows represent. You can see here the actor customer request services, which goes into the use case, and then the use case create work orders, updates the update work schedule, which then notifies another actor, which is the mechanic. And so that's how this the use case system communicates with each other. They send messages through the system into the other objects, or from use cases into other use cases, and then out to actors. So very, very neat system on how that works. The next thing, all objects that are grouped together, they are what we call a class. So sometimes these two objects here within the same use case could be considered a class. Really, it just depends on if they share information with each other, or if they share similar information. So what I mean by that, objects grouped together tend to share the common attributes and methods. They're not exactly the same, but they share the attributes and then the methods that they perform with the information provided to them. So for example, we have this object right here. The object, parent object, has different attributes: name, age, sex, hair color being some of them, and then the methods, the tasks that the parent object does. In this case, the parent methods are read bedtime story and drive in the carpool lane. So those are the those are the attributes and the methods for each object. Other objects may look very, very similar within the same class, and they may share the same attributes and some of the same methods, but they're not identical. And so that's what we refer to as a class. So understanding all the information, I then actually had to begin the assignment. So to do that, I looked over the Mozart Piano Studio system, which includes all of the information needed to build a use case diagram, which is all in a paragraph form. So I had to go through each one of those paragraphs to figure out what I needed from the document to build my object-oriented diagram. For me, the easiest method, or the easiest way of getting the information I needed, was to actually first figure out who the actors were in the use case, or in the Mozart Piano system. So I identified teachers, I identified operating officer, and identified the students as the actors. After I realized who the actors were, then I reanalyzed the document to figure out what these actors were doing to the system. How were they communicating with objects or other actors, and what kind of messages were they sending, or vice versa, what kind of messages were being sent to these actors from objects or from other actors. So let me show you my design. Now, to create my design, I use the website draw.io, and this is just, you know, a very, very basic use case diagram, object-oriented use case diagram. So we have our three actors: operating officer, the student, and the teacher. And I'm not going to go through one of these messages or use cases, but our use cases here are the ones in circle. These are not the objects. Objects are more detailed inside the use cases. But our actor, for example, here, our teacher, one of the messages that he sends is the maintain student log based on attendance and notes on students. And he sends this message into the student log. Now the student log then sends the message out to the student, which is another actor here, and it notifies the student of changes in the log. So the teacher sends messages into the student log on the attendance record and the notes on the students, and then that updates the student on the log. So that's pretty basic on how the object use case diagram works. And so that was the first part of the assignment. The second part of the assignment was creating the use case description. And so the assignment stated that we had to create a use case description for each one of those cases that we were creating. I'm not going to go through each one of them. I'm just going to give you this first example here. Now, the first use case example is for the recruiting of the teachers. And so each use case description includes a description of what is occurring within that use case, the actors involved in that case, what happens if the case is successfully completed, what happens if it's not successfully completed, any preconditions that have to occur before the case is started, and then any conditions that occur after the case finishes. So in this example, the recruiting of teachers, the description of the case is the operation officer recruits a piano teacher by having a phone interview with the pianist interested in volunteering. The operation officer will call and confirm the volunteer's name and enter it into the system. The volunteer must and will provide a Skype account during the information. Other information gathered by the operation officer, such as volunteer's music degree and awards won by them. So the actors in this use case are the operation officer and then the volunteers or teachers after that point. Now, successful completion of this use case would be operation officer views list of pianists interested in volunteering. Operation officer sets up phone interview with the volunteer. The volunteer provides all information necessary, Skype account information, music degree, awards won information, so anything that is received from the volunteer. And then the last point would be the operation officer registers the volunteer as a teacher. So that's what would happen within a successful completion of the use case. Now, alternatively, if it's not successful, so we still go through some of these same steps. Operation officer views list of the pianists interested in volunteering. The operation officer sets up the phone interview with the volunteer. The volunteer is unfortunately unable to provide necessary information, and then the operation officer does not register the volunteer as a teacher. So this alternative is what happens when the use case fails. And so each step describes what happens up to the point of it failing. Preconditions, again, they are the things that have to happen before the use case is actually started. In this case, for this use case, one of the preconditions, the pianist has to send the intent of volunteering to the system. And the post condition, what happens after the case ends, the pianist is enrolled as a volunteer / teacher in this use case. So that was the assignment, creating the use case diagram and then creating the use case description for each one of those use cases. So just to get into my ending here, just wrapping things up in conclusion, the assignment was not easy. It was very, very difficult to get through, but at the same time, I feel like I learned a lot on the use case diagrams. Yes, there's a lot that goes into it, but I think it's very, very rewarding going through all that information. I learned a lot about actors, objects, messages, attributes, and then the methods. To be honest, didn't really know how any of this worked together in systems. Didn't know how the system used all the different objects to send information to different parts of its system. So a very interesting assignment. I really, really liked it. But yeah, that's all the time I have for you guys. Thank you very much.